There is a particular kind of fear that doesn't make you run. It makes you walk toward it. The Greeks had a word for this. The idea that a man could see his own destruction coming, understand exactly what it was, and still be unable to stop moving toward it. Not because he was stupid, not because he was weak, but because the thing calling to him was more powerful than his own survival instinct. Sailors in the ancient Mediterranean didn't fear the sirens the way they feared storms. Storms you can see. Storms you can prepare for. Storms are honest about what they are. The sirens were not honest about what they were. And that, it turns out, is a far more sophisticated and far more enduring kind of terror than anything the sea itself could produce. Today we're talking about the sirens. Not the version you probably know, not the fish-tailed women of Renaissance painting, but the original, the real mythology. What they actually were, where they came from, and why the story the Greeks told about them is so much stranger and so much darker than anyone usually admits. Let's start with what the sirens were not. They were not mermaids. That conflation happened gradually over centuries as the mythology travelled through medieval Europe and artists began layering one sea creature tradition on top of another. The fishtail came from the Melusine tradition, from Celtic water spirits, from a general cultural tendency to make female monsters aquatic and seductive. The original sirens, the ones Homer describes, the ones Odysseus sails past in the Odyssey, had wings. They were bird women, half human, half bird of prey. They lived on an island, and they sang. That's it. That's the original image. Not beautiful women in the water beckoning you closer. Women with feathers and talons, perched on a rock, surrounded by the bones and rotting flesh of every sailor who had ever heard them and turned toward the sound. Homer is quite specific. The island is heaped with the bones and withering skin of men. These are not creatures who are occasionally dangerous. The ground around them is built from the dead, and they are still singing. Understanding this image, the feathers, the bones, the song that continues regardless of what it has already cost, is the key to understanding why the siren myth has lasted 3,000 years, while 1,000 other monsters have been forgotten. The sirens have a genealogy, and it tells you something important about what they were understood to be. In most accounts, they are the daughters of the river god Achelous and one of the Muses, the divine embodiments of artistic inspiration. Their father is a river associated with boundary and passage between worlds. Their mother is a muse, a being whose entire purpose is transmitting beauty and truth through art. The sirens were born from the boundary between worlds and from the divine source of music itself. They were not monsters who happened to sing. They were singers who happened to be monstrous. The song was not a trap they set. The song was what they were. Before their island, the sirens had a different role entirely. In earlier tradition, they were the handmaidens of Persephone, goddess of the underworld. They were in the meadow when Persephone was taken by Hades. They witnessed the abduction, and then Persephone was gone, and the sirens were left behind. What happened next differs by source. In some versions, they asked the gods for wings to search for Persephone. Granted, but Persephone was never found. In others, Demeter gave them wings as a punishment for failing to prevent the abduction. In others, they transformed themselves out of grief, choosing bird form because they could no longer bear to remain on the earth that had swallowed their mistress. Every version ends the same way. The sirens, winged, land on their island between the living world and the dead, and they sing. Not to lure sailors, not at first. They sing because they are in mourning. The song the sirens sing, in the oldest readings of the myth, is a lament. Hold that thought, we'll come back to it. The most famous encounter with the sirens is in Homer's Odyssey, and you probably know the broad strokes. Odysseus wants to hear the sirens' song. He has his men plug their ears with beeswax, has himself tied to the mast, and they sail past. He hears it. He loses his mind trying to get free. They sail on. It's usually presented as a story about self-control, about outsmarting temptation. But read what Homer actually wrote, and the story becomes considerably stranger. First, the sirens know Odysseus is coming. They address him by name. They know who he is, where he has been, what he has survived. This is not a passive trap set for any passing ship. It is a personal invitation, spoken with full knowledge of this specific man's history. Second, what the sirens offer is not pleasure, not beauty, not ease. What they promise in the actual text is knowledge. They say, "Come to us, and we will tell you everything that happened at Troy. Things you witnessed, things that happened after you left, things no living person knows. We know all that happens on the earth. Come to us, and you will leave wiser." The sirens are not offering Odysseus a good time. They are offering him the thing he wants most: understanding, completeness, the full story. Odysseus isn't resisting base temptation. He isn't fighting off the desire for pleasure. He is fighting off the desire to know everything, to hear the story that nobody else gets to hear, because everyone else who heard it died on the island. The sirens are not tempting him with what is low in him. They are tempting him with what is highest: his curiosity, his identity as a man who survives by understanding more than other people. That is a much more interesting thing to be afraid of. Here is a question that the myth raises and almost never answers. What did the song actually sound like? Homer doesn't describe it in musical terms. He gives us the content, the promise of knowledge, but not the sound itself. The experience of hearing it is described only through Odysseus's reaction. He is driven to madness, trying to get free from the mast, screaming at his men to release him, and they row harder and plug their ears more tightly, and eventually the island is behind them. What the song sounds like to Odysseus is never directly stated. only what it makes him want. This, I think, is deliberate, and it's one of the most sophisticated choices in the entire mythology. Because the thing about the siren song, the reason it works on Odysseus specifically, the reason it would have worked differently on a different man, is that it doesn't sound the same to everyone. The song is not a fixed object. It is a mirror. It reflects back at you the thing you most desperately want to hear. For Odysseus, it is knowledge, the promise of a complete account of Troy. For a sailor 10 years from home, it might sound like his wife's voice. For a man who watched his crew die, it might sound like their voices telling him it wasn't his fault. For a dying man, it might sound like reassurance that the other side is something rather than nothing. The siren song is whatever you most need the world to say to you. And that is why it kills you. Not because it lies, but because it tells you the one truth you cannot resist. And walking toward it takes you off the edge of the island, into the water, among the bones. Odysseus is a famous one. But there is another encounter with the sirens in Greek mythology that is in some ways more revealing. And it almost never gets the attention it deserves. In the myth of Jason and the Argonauts, the Argo sails past the Sirens' Island, and where Odysseus used beeswax and rope to survive, the Argonauts used something entirely different. Orpheus, the greatest musician in all of Greek mythology, the man whose playing moved rocks and trees and rivers, whose music was so perfect that it convinced Hades himself to release the dead. Orpheus picks up his lyre when the sirens begin to sing, and he plays. He doesn't block out the siren song. He doesn't tie anyone to a mast. He simply plays louder, or rather, he plays better. His music is more beautiful than theirs, and the crew, caught between two songs, follows a more beautiful one. One Argonaut, Butes, still jumps into the sea toward the sirens. He can't help it. The siren song reaches him through Orpheus's music like a signal through static. He has to be rescued by Aphrodite, who takes pity on him. One man out of the whole crew. Think about what this scene is saying. The siren song cannot be defeated by reason. It cannot be defeated by willpower alone. Butes proves that. It can only be answered by something more powerful than itself, by a song that is better, by beauty that exceeds the beauty of the trap. Orpheus's counter-strategy is not to deny that the sirens are beautiful. It is to be more beautiful. It is not to argue against the song. It is to sing over it. That is a very different lesson than the one Odysseus teaches. Odysseus says, know your weakness, restrain yourself, survive by force. Orpheus says, the only answer to a beautiful lie is a more beautiful truth. And if you think about that long enough, it stops being a story about sailors and starts being a story about something else entirely. Here is the part of the siren mythology that most people don't know, because it comes after the famous encounters, and the ancient sources don't linger on it. There was a prophecy attached to the sirens, an old one, probably older than Homer. The prophecy said that the sirens would die or cease to be, or lose their power, the sources are inconsistent. If a ship ever sailed past them and no one answered the song. When Odysseus sailed past, lashed to the mast and screaming, he heard the song. He answered it in his way. He wanted desperately to go to them. He was not unmoved. The beeswax and the ropes worked, but they were working against a man who was genuinely, completely undone by what he heard. He doesn't count as someone who didn't answer. But in some later versions of the myth, the sirens interpret Odysseus' survival differently. He heard the song. He did not come. By their own rules, they have failed. In these versions, after the Argo passes, after Orpheus plays them into irrelevance, the sirens throw themselves into the sea and drown. Not because they were destroyed, not because a hero killed them, because they lost, because there were ships that sailed past, because the song for the first time went unanswered. And there is something in that ending that feels important. The sirens were never infinite. They were never invincible. They were creatures sustained by the responses they provoked, by the sailors who turned and swam toward them. Their power was not absolute. It was participatory. It required the listener's cooperation, even involuntary cooperation, to function. Remove the listener, and the song becomes just sound. Beautiful sound, maybe, but sound without meaning, without anyone to consume it, without anyone to destroy. The sirens have lasted 3,000 years as a cultural image. Myths that stick around that long are doing something more than entertaining people. They are processing something real. So what is the siren actually about? Not seduction in the simple sense. The sirens aren't in the same category as Aphrodite or Circe, figures of desire in the conventional sense. What they represent is more specific and more disturbing. The moment when your own mind becomes the enemy. The beeswax protects Odysseus' crew because they never hear the song. They are safe. But Odysseus, who hears it, is in a different kind of danger. One that the ropes can only manage, not eliminate. The threat is inside him now. It has taken the form of his own deepest longing, and the only thing standing between him and death is external force. His men, rope, prior instructions he gave before the song began. He cannot save himself from himself. The ancient Greeks understood something about human psychology we still find uncomfortable. The most dangerous desires are not the base ones. The desire for food, safety, comfort. These can be satisfied and they quiet down. The desire to know, to hear the full story, to be the one with the complete picture. This one doesn't quiet. It can't be fully satisfied because there is always more to know. And it will walk you off a cliff if you let it. The sirens are the myth's name for that particular hunger. And the reason sailors feared them, the reason this worked for people who actually spent their lives on open water, is that the sea is exactly the place where that hunger becomes lethal. Out there, past the horizon, where the maps run out, the desire to go further than you should, to sail toward the unknown, thing just past visibility. That desire kills people. It killed people then. It kills people now in different forms. The sirens don't force you into the water. They just make you want to know what's on the other side of the horizon badly enough that you stop paying attention to the rocks. The sirens are not a simple story. They never were. They are a myth about the relationship between beauty and destruction, about the way the most dangerous traps are the ones that feel like gifts, about the fact that the things most likely to kill you are often the things that feel most like answers. They are a story about the difference between what you want and what you need, about the music that sounds like truth but leads to bones, about the ship that keeps sailing and the one man who couldn't stop listening. They are 3,000 years old and have not aged a single day. For further reading, Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey is the best modern English version, and she writes about the sirens with particular care. Paige Dubois and Claude Calam's work on Greek lyric and desire touch on the siren tradition from a classical scholarship angle. For the pre-Homeric layers, Gregory Nage's work on early Greek oral tradition is as deep as you want to go. The song is still out there. Most people have heard it, in one form or another. The question is whether you already tied yourself to the mast. Thanks for watching.